38,000 feet above a black ocean. The captain collapsed across the controls, and the jet dropped like somebody had cut a rope. Drinks flew. Oxygen masks burst from the ceiling. 300 passengers screamed as the cabin tilted, and a skinny black boy from row 39 tore off his seatbelt and ran for the cockpit. A wealthy black man in first class stepped into the aisle, spread his arms, and snapped, "Sit down, little man. This is not your place." The boy's name was Malik Turner, and humiliation was nothing new to him. The faded hoodie under his thrift store coat, the scuffed sneakers, the cheap duffel with one broken strap, all of it announced poverty before he ever opened his mouth. The man blocking him was Darius Stokes, a black aviation executive with a diamond watch, a television smile, and the kind of money that made people move just because he frowned. Around them, even in panic, a few passengers still found room to sneer. One black woman in a silk travel set clutched her pearls and said the child had lost his mind. Another man lifted his phone and started recording like fear had turned into entertainment. Somebody muttered, "The poor kids always thought heart was the same thing as training." Malik said nothing back. He just looked past them toward the cockpit door, already half open, and listened to the sound of the airplane the way some children listened to rain. Then the plane lurched again, harder this time, and the scream that tore through the cabin was no longer rich or poor, polished or rough. It was human. It was the sound of every status symbol on board becoming useless at once. And in that collapsing second, only one person on the aircraft knew the difference between panic and procedure. 6 hours earlier, Malik had stood in Terminal C with his whole life in one hand and his father's old binder in the other. The binder was swollen with loose pages, handwritten notes, and worn tabs that kept slipping free. On the front, in faded marker, were the words David Turner. Flight systems, maintenance. His father had written them years ago, back when his hands still smelled like jet fuel and grease instead of hospital soap and nothing at all. David Turner had never been a pilot. He was a black maintenance technician from Baltimore who knew airplanes from the inside out and died before anybody important ever learned his worth. He had spent 12 years crawling through electrical bays, replacing failing parts and filing safety reports that executors praised in private and ignored in meetings. 3 years earlier, after a ramp accident and a chain of medical neglect, their family could not afford to fight. He was gone. Malik was 9 when he found the binder in the closet, hidden behind winter blankets and old church shoes. Inside were diagrams, emergency notes, cockpit sketches, and pages of plain language his father had written for himself, so he would never forget a system failure twice. Malik read those pages the way other children read comic books. He traced arrows with his finger. He memorized switches. Before he had ever seen them in real life, his mother, Tasha Turner, worked 2 jobs and called those pages his father's second heartbeat. She cleaned offices before sunrise and worked a hospital cafeteria at night, and still somehow kept lights on in a 1-bedroom apartment where the heat clicked more than it warmed. Malik studied on a second-hand laptop that sounded like it might quit every 10 minutes. He used free simulator software, borrowed library Wi-Fi, and a notebook full of corrections written in his own careful block letters. He did not play the game the way other kids did. He flew the same routes again and again until he could feel what the airplane wanted before the screen showed it. He practiced engine failures, electrical faults, bad weather, radio calls, rough landings, and missed approaches. He learned not because anyone expected greatness from a poor black boy, but because he had already learned what happens when the world decides your people can be brilliant and still disposable. That morning, Tasha had hugged him so tight at the curb he could feel her shaking. He was flying alone to Paris for a youth science program that had finally offered a partial scholarship after months of rejections and waiting lists. She had sold her wedding band to cover the rest. Before letting go, she pressed her forehead to his and said, "You carry your father's name like a light baby. Don't let anybody make you carry it like a burden." Malik nodded, though he knew people would try. They usually did. At the gate, airline staff spoke over him until he answered in calm, perfect sentences and forced them to look directly at him. Two boys, his age, laughed at his coat. A businessman looked at the binder on the Malik's arm and asked if he was delivering papers for somebody. Malik just smiled, sat near the window, and kept reading a page about flight control backups. Darius Stokes entered that same gate area 20 minutes later, like the terminal had been arranged for his arrival. He was a black man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, surrounded by assistants who moved fast and nodded faster. He owned a major avionics company, sat on charity boards, financed scholarships, gave speeches about lifting the community, and never missed a chance to remind people he had pulled himself up by force. He also believed poverty was a moral failure once you had seen enough success to forget how hunger sounded. He noticed Malik only once before boarding. The boy had drifted too close to the priority lane while reading, and Darius glanced at the binder, the cheap bag, the worn sleeves, then said to an attendant, "Make sure the coach stays with the coach." He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. The quiet cut deeper because it carried practice. Malik heard him. He lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but in control. People like Darius mistook restraint for weakness because they had forgotten how often poor black families teach their children silence simply to survive public spaces. Malik moved back without argument, sat down, and opened the binder to a page his father had marked with a red star. In the margin, David Turner had written, "Systems fail loudly. People fail quietly. Learn both." The flight took off into the sunset smooth as prayer. "Malik, got a window?" Darius got first class, scotch, and a satellite call about a merger that would make him even richer. Between them sat an airplane full of black families, black students, black business owners, black elders, black newlyweds, black nurses, black church ladies, black babies sleeping on mothers' shoulders, all moving through the sky together and carrying different versions of the same long history. For 3 hours, the cabin settled into the soft routine of travel. Malik studied the route map, counted engine changes, and ate pretzels one at a time so he could make them last. A black flight attendant named Rochelle Freeman smiled when she saw the binder and asked if he liked planes. He said, "Yes, ma'am. I study them." She laughed warmly and told him to save some genius for the rest of the world. Then the first sharp jolt hit. It snapped the conversation in half. Another came harder, and a cart slammed sideways in the galley. Up front, Captain Lena Brooks, a black woman with 18 years in the air, reached for the controls just as a burst of pain tore across her chest and arm. Her first officer, Jamal Price, lunged to help, lost his balance in the violent shake, and struck the side panel hard enough to drop unconscious where he sat. The autopilot disengaged with a warning tone Malik knew in his bones. The nose dipped. The left wing lowered. The cabin became a storm of shouts, falling bags, crying children, and prayers spoken out loud. Malik lifted his head so fast the oxygen mask beside him swung like a pendulum. He listened once, just once, and understood the plane was no longer being flown. That was the moment he ran. By the time he reached row 7, Darius Stokes had planted himself in the aisle-like authority could substitute for skill. His face was pale now, but his voice was still sharp, still polished, still used to obedience. "You think because you played on a computer you can save this plane?" Darius barked. "Sit down before you kill us all." The words hit with old poison. Not just doubt, not just fear, the kind of classy contempt that says, a poor black child can be brave only from the safety of his own seat. Malik's chest rose. Once he looked Arias dead in the eye and said, "Sir, if nobody touches that plane correctly in the next minute, we are going to keep dropping." He did not shout it. He said it the way truth sounds when it is too urgent to decorate. Rochelle stared at him, then at the cockpit door hanging crooked on its latch, and something in her decided faster than policy. She moved aside. Darius reached for Malik's arm. The plane suddenly dropped again, and the big man lost his footing long enough for the boy to slip past him. By the time Darius caught himself, Malik was through the cockpit door and into the only place on Earth where nobody cared what his coat cost. Captain Brooks was slumped forward, alive but fading, one hand hanging uselessly by her side. Jamal Price lay twisted against the console, blood at his temple, breathing but gone to the moment. The jet was banking left and descending too fast. Malik slid into the first officer's seat, feet barely reaching, hands shaking only until they touched something familiar. He leveled the wings first. His father had always written that panic loves a dive because it makes people grab for everything except the right thing. Malik eased the control back, trimmed the nose, and fixed his eyes on the instrument display. The screaming behind him softened, not because the fear was gone, but because the falling finally slowed. Then came the strangest silence of his life. The airplane steadied. His father's binder was open on his lap. The cockpit lights washed his thin face blue and gold. And for one impossible beat, a poor black boy from a neighborhood nobody in first class would ever visit was the only barrier between 300 lives and the dark Atlantic below. He found the radio and spoke with a steadiness that did not sound 12. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Crown Atlantic 602, pilot incapacitated. Co-pilot unconscious. I am a passenger. I have partial control of the aircraft and need immediate guidance." On the other end, a black woman's voice answered from Irish airspace control, sharp and stunned and suddenly very careful. Her name was Commander Nia Bannister, a former military pilot now working emergency approach support. She asked, "Who is flying?" Malik answered, "My name is Malik Turner. I'm 12. Please don't waste time on my age." For half a second, the frequency went dead. Then Nia said, "Copy that, Malik. I'm with you now. Keep breathing. Keep the wings level. We are getting you down." The cockpit door opened behind him. Darius Stokes had forced his way in, dragging first-class certainty behind him, even though certainty had already failed everyone. He announced his resume before anyone asked for it. Former military rotor pilot, aviation executive, board member, a man used to being the most important person in any room. Malik did not turn around. "Can you fly this aircraft?" he asked. Darius opened his mouth and found out that pride has no checklist. He could talk markets, mergers, policy, leadership, philanthropy, and legacy. He could not fly this jet. Rochelle stood in the doorway, one hand over her mouth, watching a child hold level flight while a titan of industry had nothing useful to offer. Outside the windshield there was only night. Inside the cockpit there was no status left, only competence. Darius took one step back, and in that step the hierarchy cracked. Nia guided Malik toward a stable altitude and a diversion to Dublin. Malik read the displays faster than she expected. He answered her with short, crisp phrases. When she asked how he knew the aircraft so well, he lifted the binder just enough for Darius to see the cover. David Turner. The name landed like a door slamming in an empty hall. Darius knew that name. 3 years ago, David Turner had filed repeated warnings about an unstable flight control relay unit manufactured by Stokes Aerodynamics. The failures were intermittent, hard to reproduce, expensive to recall, and buried in language executives knew how to suffocate. Darius had approved the decision to monitor instead of ground. He told himself the data was incomplete. He told himself caution was not denial. He told himself many profitable lies. Now that dead worker's son was flying an airplane held together by the very corner-cutting Darius had signed off on. Malik flipped to a page marked with yellow tape. In the margin, David had written a manual reset sequence never added to official materials because no one upstairs wanted proof the flaw was real. Darius recognized the handwriting from scanned reports his office had stamped and buried. The cockpit chimed again. A control warning flashed. The plane shivered left, hungry for chaos. Nia's voice sharpened and told Malik the backup guidance had dropped. For the first time since taking the seat, Malik's fingers trembled enough for Darius to see they belonged to a child. "What do you need?" Darius asked, and the words sounded like they cost him blood. Malik kept one hand on the controls and pointed to a maintenance panel behind the captain's seat. Third column, red-tagged relay breaker. Pull it for 10 seconds. Push it back in. Darius stared at the tiny labels, his expensive hands suddenly clumsy, his eyes watering with the shame of discovering that wealth had made him powerful without making him useful. He found the breaker. He counted out loud. Each number felt like a confession. When he pushed it back in, the warning cleared, the system stabilized, and Nia's relieved breath came through the headset like a blessing. Malik did not celebrate. He just kept flying. But Darius looked at him differently now, not as a boy out of place, but as the living witness to everything his class had learned to overlook in its own people. Quiet brilliance, handed-down discipline, the kind of excellence forged without safety nets, polishing, or permission. The descent to our Dublin was long enough for truth to stop hiding. Darius asked about David Turner, and Malik answered in a flat voice of a child who has explained pain to adults before. His father had worked extra shifts, documented defects, been ignored, then died waiting for better insurance to approve treatment. After the ramp accident, that should never have happened. He kept warning people, Malik said. Nobody listened because he fixed things with a toolbox instead of a title. That moment cracked something inside Darius. Looking at Captain Brooks struggling to breathe, he finally saw the cost of every polished excuse he had once called strategy. He realized how often men like him spoke of pride while protecting systems that quietly crushed people the moment they became inconvenient. For the first time, he understood he hadn't escaped that machine. He had simply learned to sit comfortably inside it. Grusha cried in silence. Nia's steady voice guided them from the ground, calm and unshaken. Jamal Price stirred briefly, bloodied and fading, but clear enough to whisper, "Baby, keep flying," before slipping back into darkness. At 10,000 feet, city lights flickered through heavy rain like distant gold. Malik worked step by step, saying each action aloud to steady himself. Flaps set, speed checked, heading steady, glide path captured. With every word, his fear lost ground. When Malik asked, Darius followed instructions without hesitation. No ego, no control, just humility. For the first time, leadership meant listening. As they descended, the storm worsened. The aircraft shook, the runway hidden. At minimums, nothing appeared. Malik hesitated, ready to pull away, until Darius leaned forward and whispered, 12 o'clock. I see the lights. Malik saw them tiny, trembling, real, and took full control, flying the final stretch by instinct and memory. His father's lessons guided every move. Feel the wind, trust the instruments, let the earth rise. The landing hit hard but held. Tires screamed, engines roared, and the plane slowed safely under relentless rain. For a moment, silence. Then the cabin erupted with applause, tears, prayers, and 300 lives, realizing how close they had come to losing everything. Malik sat frozen, hands locked on the controls, until the world rushed back in. Emergency crews flooded the aircraft. The captain survived. Passengers were shaken but alive, wrapped in a blanket. Malik asked only for a phone. His mother answered through tears. "Mama, I'm okay," he said, voice breaking. Daddy's notes worked. Later, a powerful man admitted the truth. His choices had nearly cost every life on board. Malik didn't comfort him. He asked one question. "What are you going to do now?" By sunrise, change had begun. Grounded planes, exposed truths, and a promise to never ignore voices like Malik's again.